My absent father tried to ruin my engagement, and now my whole family is pretending he's the victim, even though he was never there for me. I read it. I never thought I'd be writing this here, but the rage I feel has me needing an outlet. So buckle up for a tale that has me questioning whether family means anything at all. To give some background, my name's Sarah, 29F, and I was raised by a single mom, Emily, 58F, who did everything for me and my sister, Jessica, 32F. My dad, Michael, 60M, was practically a ghost in my life. I mean, he wasn't even on my birth certificate. My mom always told me he didn't believe I was his until I was 13 and had a paternity test to prove it. And even after that, he didn't step up. Anyway, a few years ago, I got engaged to my now husband, Ryan, 33M, who is honestly the best person I've ever met. Ryan's from a solid middle-class background. His parents are supportive, loving, the whole deal. Meanwhile, my dad comes in and out of my life like a bad sitcom character, only showing up when he can make a scene. My sister, though, Jessica, adores him. She seems to have forgotten that he was never around when we were kids and likes to pretend he's some doting father. It all came to a head when Ryan and I got engaged. We were having dinner with my family, well, my family plus my dad, at this little restaurant. Everyone was there, including my mom, my sister, and a few cousins. That's when the drama started. My dad had the audacity to say, well, he didn't even ask me for permission. And read it, I saw red. Imagine that. This man who hadn't bothered to be present for 99% of my life suddenly thought he was entitled to some grand show of respect? I almost laughed, but I was too angry. What makes it worse is that everyone at the table just kind of brushed it off with a chuckle. Even Ryan, bless his heart, tried to lighten the mood with a joke about how that's why we were there for the weekend. But my mind was reeling. How does this guy, who could barely be bothered to remember my birthday, have the nerve to pull this father of the bride card? And of course, my sister Jessica jumped right in. She's always been the peacemaker, trying to make excuses for everyone. Oh, you know Dad's just trying to be funny, she said with this smug little smile, as if that excused everything. But I wasn't having it. For once, I wanted to call out the absolute ridiculousness of this situation. I didn't say anything at the table, though. I held my tongue because I didn't want to ruin the night for Ryan. But inside, I was seething. My dad's lack of involvement in my life had always been this festering wound, and now he was just pouring salt into it. The man didn't raise me. He didn't help with school, didn't come to parent-teacher conferences, didn't show up at my high school graduation. And now he thinks he's owed some ceremonial respect? Give me a break. The night didn't get any better either. As dinner went on, my dad kept making little comments, inserting himself into conversations that had nothing to do with him. It wasn't just the permission comment. Oh no, that was just the beginning. Every time someone tried to talk about the wedding plans, my dad would find a way to shift the focus back to him. Well, I think the father of the bride should get a special dance too, he announced at one point, as if we were in some Hallmark movie and he was a real dad who had been there every step of the way. And here's where things really took a turn. My mom, bless her, has always been the quiet, take-no-drama type. But even she had a moment where I could see the annoyance bubbling up. She's the one who did all the heavy lifting, and yet there was Michael trying to rewrite history in front of everyone. Jessica, of course, was eating it all up. You're so right, Dad. I think it'd be beautiful if you had a dance with Sarah, she cooed. I couldn't believe it. It was like I had entered some parallel universe where my absent father was the hero of the story, and I was the one being unreasonable for feeling betrayed. And let's not even talk about how my cousins, mostly on my dad's side, were just sitting there nodding along. They've always been on the wealthier side, and they treat my dad like he's some misunderstood saint. It's like they refuse to see the truth because it doesn't fit their narrative of our family. As the night dragged on, the resentment inside me grew. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about all the years of neglect, all the times he wasn't there, and how everyone else just pretended that was normal. I mean, sure, not all families are perfect, but my dad's absence wasn't just imperfections. It was neglect, plain and simple. And yet, here I was, sitting at a dinner table with people acting like it was all water under the bridge. Ryan, ever the sweetheart, noticed something was off with me. He tried to check in, but I just plastered on a smile and told him I was fine. I wasn't about to ruin the night over this. At least that's what I told myself. Then, out of nowhere, my dad brought up the paternity test. Remember that time we had to do that DNA test, Sarah? You were so mad at me, he said with this self-satisfied smirk, like it was all some cute family memory. My jaw almost hit the floor. I had been 13 when he made me take that test. 13. What kind of father makes his teenage daughter take a paternity test after years of not even bothering to show up? That wasn't a fun little anecdote. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. But there he was, telling it like it was some quirky father-daughter bonding moment. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I snapped. Are you serious right now? I blurted out louder than I intended. The whole table went silent and all eyes were on me. I could feel my heart racing, but there was no turning back. You think the paternity test was a joke? Do you have any idea how messed up that was for me? You weren't even there, Dad. You've never been there. And now you want to act like you're part of this wedding? Like you deserve some special role? I could see my mom's eyes widen. She knew I was about to go off, but I couldn't stop myself. I had been bottling this up for years and I was done pretending everything was fine. I glanced over at Jessica, who looked shocked as if she couldn't believe I was finally standing up to him. The cousins? They just stared awkwardly at their plates. My dad, though, he had the nerve to look offended. I'm still your father, Sarah, he said, as if that alone erased years of absence. I might not have been perfect, but I'm trying. Trying? That's what he called showing up twice a year and tossing in a phone call on Christmas? I felt my blood pressure rising, and before I knew it, I was on my feet. You don't get to rewrite history, I said, my voice shaking. You weren't there. You don't get to make this about you. This wedding is about me and Ryan, and you don't get to just insert yourself like nothing ever happened. The room was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. But I didn't care. I wasn't about to sit there and let him play the victim. Not after everything he'd put me through. For years, I had swallowed my feelings, let him come and go as he pleased, and let Jessica act like he was some sort of misunderstood hero. But that night, I couldn't do it anymore. My dad just sat there, blinking at me like he couldn't understand why I was upset. It was infuriating. He was so wrapped up in his own world that he didn't even get it. It wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't even about the paternity test. It was about the years of neglect, the way he abandoned me and my sister, and the fact that he thought he could just waltz back into my life whenever it was convenient for him. Jessica, ever the mediator, tried to step in. Sarah, I think you're being a little harsh. Dad's trying, okay? We should be grateful he's here at all. Grateful? I nearly laughed. The idea that I should feel grateful for the bare minimum was laughable. But that's Jessica for you. She's always been the one who tries to smooth things over, who avoids conflict at all costs. She'd rather sweep everything under the rug than face the reality of our messed up family dynamic. No, Jess, I said, my voice cold. I'm done pretending. I'm done making excuses for him. If he wants to be in my life, he needs to own up to the fact that he wasn't there. I'm not going to play this game anymore. I could feel the air in the room shift. My mom looked like she was about to cry, and Ryan just sat there, unsure of what to say. I don't blame him. He's not used to this level of family drama. His parents are the kind of people who talk things out, who deal with their issues in a calm, rational way. Meanwhile, my family? We just sweep everything under the rug until it explodes. My dad, though, didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at me like I had slapped him across the face. Maybe he was finally starting to realize that he couldn't just show up and expect everything to be fine. Or maybe he was too stubborn to admit that he had messed up. Either way, I wasn't about to back down. That's when my cousins decided to chime in. Sarah, I think you're being a little too harsh on your dad, one of them said. He's trying to make up for lost time. Make up for lost time? That phrase hit me like a ton of bricks. You can't just make up for lost time. You don't get to disappear for years and then come back when it's convenient for you. But apparently that's what my dad and everyone else at the table thought was acceptable. The cousin who spoke was Daniel, 35M, one of those polished, upper-class types who had always looked down on us for being a single-mom household. His dad was my dad's brother, and they came from money. Old money. The kind of people who had generational wealth, vacation homes, and the luxury of playing pretend family whenever they felt like it. Make up for lost time? I repeated, my voice thick with sarcasm. He can't make up for anything. That's the point. He wasn't there, and now he wants to waltz back into my life like none of it matters. Daniel, of course, didn't back down. He was always the smug, know-it-all type. I just think it's important to forgive, he said, leaning back in his chair like he was giving me some sage advice. Forgive? Sure. Easy to say when you grew up with two parents who were there. It's easy to preach forgiveness when you've never been the one waiting by the phone, hoping for a call that never came. But I wasn't about to take life advice from someone who had no idea what it was like to grow up the way I did. I shot him a look. You don't get it, Daniel, and you never will. My dad didn't just miss out on a couple of baseball games. He missed everything. So no, I'm not going to forgive him just because he showed up for a dinner. Jessica, sensing that things were getting heated, jumped in again. Sarah, please. This is supposed to be a celebration, not a fight. Can't we all just get along for one night? I could feel my patience slipping. No, Jess, we can't. Not when everyone's acting like I'm the one who's overreacting. My voice was tight and I could feel the tears threatening to spill over. It wasn't just about the dinner or the engagement anymore. It was about years of pretending, of sweeping things under the rug, and I wasn't going to do it anymore. And that's when my dad finally spoke up. I get it, Sarah. You're angry. But I'm still your father. Still my father. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was he really trying to play that card? The audacity was almost laughable. Before I could respond, my mom, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. Michael, you've never been there for Sarah. You don't get to act like this is all okay now. Her voice was quiet but firm, and I could see the years of frustration etched on her face. The whole table went dead silent. My mom wasn't one to start drama, but when she spoke, people listened. Even Jessica didn't know what to say. I could see the shock on my dad's face as my mom finally laid it all out. For once, someone else was standing up to him, and I could tell he didn't know how to respond. My dad always had this way of acting like he was above it all, like nothing ever got to him. But in that moment, I saw a flicker of something. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, maybe just confusion, but it was there. Emily, my dad started, but my mom wasn't done. You can't just come back into her life when it's convenient for you, she said, her voice calm but full of emotion. You weren't there when she needed you. You don't get to decide when you're part of her life now. I had never felt more grateful for my mom in that moment. She had always been the one holding everything together, picking up the pieces that my dad left behind. But now she was standing up for me, and it felt like the weight of ready to take the full brunt of what my mom was saying. He looked around the table, probably hoping for someone, anyone, to back him up, but no one did. Not even Jessica. For once, everyone just sat there, silently absorbing the truth that had been hanging in the air for years. My dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. I've made mistakes, he said, trying to regain some control of the conversation. But I'm here now and I want to be part of this. Sarah, I want to be part of your life. The way he said it, like showing up a few times a year now would magically erase all the pain from the past, made me angrier. I wasn't looking for an apology or some grand gesture of forgiveness. I just wanted acknowledgement that he had failed me, that he had chosen not to be in my life when it mattered most. But before I could say anything, Daniel chimed in again. See? He's trying, Sarah. I think it's time to move on from the past. Move on? My blood boiled. It wasn't about moving on. It wasn't even about the wedding anymore. It was about the years of emotional abandonment, the countless times I wondered why I wasn't good enough for him to stick around. And now I was being told to let it go because he finally decided to show up? No way. I stood up, my hands shaking. I'm not doing this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but firm. I'm not going to let you rewrite the narrative, Dad. I felt everyone's eyes on me as I stood there, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. You weren't there when I needed you, I continued, my voice louder now. You didn't show up when I graduated high school, you didn't help me move into my first apartment, and you sure as hell weren't around when I needed someone to talk to about life. You missed all of that. My dad's face tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Maybe he knew there was nothing he could say to make it right. And now, I said, looking directly at him, you think you can just come in, make jokes about permission, and be a part of this wedding like it's all fine? It's not fine, and it never has been. Jessica, always trying to keep the peace, reached for my hand. Sarah, please. This isn't the time. We can talk about this later. I pulled my hand away, not in the mood for her peacekeeping routine. No, Jess, we can't talk about it later. Because every time we've tried to talk about it later, nothing changes. You make excuses for him, and I'm done with that. Ryan, my fiancé, stood up beside me, putting a comforting hand on my back. He didn't say anything, but his presence gave me the strength to keep going. This wasn't just about venting my frustrations anymore. It was about finally letting go of the toxic dynamic that had poisoned our family for years. The silence at the table was deafening. I could tell that no one knew what to say, but I wasn't finished yet. It's not about holding a grudge, I said, my voice cracking a little. It's about recognizing that actions have consequences. You can't just disappear for decades and expect everything to be fine when you finally decide to show up. I could feel the weight of years of hurt and resentment bubbling to the surface, but I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. My dad finally spoke, his voice quieter now, almost as if he was trying to sound reasonable. Sarah, I know I wasn't there like I should have been, but I want to be here now. Can't we start over? That's when I realized he still didn't get it. It wasn't about starting over. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It was about acknowledging that the past shaped who I was, shaped the hurt I carried with me for years, and that he had been the one to inflict that hurt. You don't get to just start over, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. You don't get to pretend the last 20 years didn't happen. This isn't some do-over. I'm getting married to the man I love, and this wedding isn't about you. Jessica looked like she wanted to say something, but for once, she stayed quiet. At that moment, I felt an immense weight lift off my chest. For the first time in years, I had said exactly what I had been feeling. No more pretending. No more keeping the peace for everyone else's sake. This was my truth, and I had finally spoken it out loud. Ryan gently squeezed my shoulder, silently supporting me, and I knew he was proud of me for standing up for myself. That was one of the many reasons I loved him. He always gave me the space to be honest, even when it was hard. But the silence in the room was thick and uncomfortable. My dad sat there, looking stunned, like he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. I think, deep down, he always thought I would just accept whatever scraps of attention he decided to give me. Daniel, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for a few minutes, finally decided to break the silence. Look, Sarah, I get that you're upset, but I don't think this is the way to handle it. Family is important. You're going to regret pushing your dad away. I shot him a look, my patience wearing thin. Family is important, I agreed, but that doesn't mean I have to keep letting people hurt me just because we share blood. And there it was, the truth. The harsh reality that some people refuse to accept. That sometimes, cutting ties is the only way to protect yourself. Jessica, always the mediator, stepped in again. Sarah, we're family. We're supposed to work through things, not tear each other apart. I felt my anger flare again. Jess, you don't get it. You never have. You've always been willing to forgive Dad for everything because he never hurt you the way he hurt me. You had him in your life a little more than I did. But me? I got scraps. And now he wants to act like he deserves to be a big part of my wedding? I'm not okay with that, and I won't pretend to be. My sister looked down at her plate, finally realizing that her usual peacemaking tactics weren't going to work this time. The truth was, Jessica had always played the role of the good daughter, the one who didn't stir the pot. And while I admired her for that at times, it wasn't something I could do anymore. My dad's face hardened, and I could tell he didn't like being confronted like this. I didn't expect this from you, he muttered, shaking his head. I thought you'd be more understanding. Understanding of what? I shot back. That you bailed on us when we were kids? That you made Mom do everything? That you've only ever been around when it's convenient for you? The frustration in my voice was unmistakable. I had spent too many years being understanding, too many years making excuses for him, and now I was done. The air felt like it could be cut with a knife as everyone sat in stunned silence. Even my cousins, who usually had something to say, stayed quiet. Maybe they were realizing just how deep the wounds ran, or maybe they were finally seeing that this wasn't some simple family spat that could be fixed with an apology. I could tell my dad was struggling to keep his composure. He had always been the kind of guy who thought he could charm his way out of any situation, but charm wasn't going to cut it this time. "I'm trying," he said again, but it sounded weaker now, like even he didn't believe it anymore. I sighed, feeling the exhaustion of years of pent-up emotions weighing me down. "You always say you're trying, Dad. But trying isn't enough when you've been absent for my entire life. I don't need you to try anymore. I needed you to be there and you weren't." My mom, who had been silently watching everything unfold, finally spoke again. "Michael, you need to understand that showing up now doesn't erase the past. You can't just come in and act like nothing happened." Her words hung in the air, and for once, my dad had no snappy comeback. He just sat there looking defeated. And honestly, that was the first time I had ever seen him look like he truly understood what he had done. It was almost surreal seeing my dad, this man who had always acted like the world revolved around him, finally sit there and absorb the reality of the situation. He wasn't the victim here. He never was. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize that. But even then, I wasn't looking for an apology or some grand gesture of redemption. It was too late for that. What I wanted was for him to understand that actions have consequences. That you can't just abandon your responsibilities and expect everything to be fine when you decide to come back. Ryan, ever my rock, spoke up for the first time that night. "Sarah's right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about the wedding. It's about everything that's led up to this moment. And if you want to be part of our lives, you have to start by acknowledging what you've done." My dad blinked, clearly not expecting Ryan to chime in. He had always been dismissive of my relationships in the past, never really taking the men in my life seriously. But Ryan was different. He was steady, dependable, and most importantly, he understood me in a way that my dad never had. For a moment, my dad just stared at Ryan like he didn't know what to make of him. But then he nodded. It was the smallest gesture, but it was something. Maybe it was the first step toward understanding, or maybe it was just him giving up. Either way, I didn't care. After that, the dinner felt like it was dragging on forever. The tension in the room was palpable, and everyone was too uncomfortable to speak. My cousins stayed in their seats, shifting awkwardly, and even Jessica had nothing left to say. It was like the reality of the situation had finally sunk in, and no one knew how to navigate the mess that had just unfolded. Ryan and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that it was time to leave. There was nothing more to be said here. I had said my piece, and honestly, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of my father's absence on my shoulders. I had confronted it, laid it all out in the open, and now I was done with it. "We're going to head out," I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. "Thank you everyone for coming, but we're done here." My dad looked like he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me taking control of my life, my wedding, and my future. I wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, drag me back into the toxic cycle of excuses and half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. Ryan stood up with me, giving me a small smile. "Let's go," he said softly, and together we left the restaurant, leaving the uncomfortable silence behind us. I wish I could say that leaving the restaurant was the end of it, that once we walked out, everything felt better, but it didn't. Family drama doesn't just end like that, no matter how many confrontations you have. The truth is, I still felt the sting of everything that had happened, and the days that followed weren't much easier. Jessica tried to call me the next morning, but I didn't pick up. I knew what she was going to say, that I had overreacted, that I should have let it go for the sake of peace, that I had ruined what should have been a happy night. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't about to apologize for speaking my truth. Then the comments started rolling in from other family members. "Why couldn't you just let him have this one thing? He's trying, Sarah. Isn't that worth something? You're going to regret pushing your father away." It was the same old narrative, the same old pressure to forgive and forget, just because we were family. But here's the thing. Family doesn't give you a free pass to hurt people over and over again. Family doesn't mean you get to skip accountability. And just because my dad wanted to try, now didn't mean I had to let him in with open arms. I wasn't going to let him off the hook just because it made other people feel more comfortable. The worst part though, my dad didn't reach out once. Not even to apologize. Maybe he thought he'd done enough just by showing up, but to me that was just another sign that nothing had really changed. It wasn't until a week later that I got a text from Jessica. It was short, just a few words. "I think you should talk to Dad." I stared at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. Of course she wanted me to talk to him. She was always the one trying to play peacemaker, always the one who couldn't handle confrontation. But I wasn't going to let her guilt me into something I wasn't ready for. Still, the nagging thought in the back of my mind lingered. Should I talk to him? Should I at least give him a chance to explain himself? But then I reminded myself that I didn't owe him anything. He had had years to reach out, to make amends, and he hadn't. Now, he was only trying because he had been forced to face the consequences of his actions. So I didn't respond to Jessica's text. I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, pressure me into something I wasn't ready for. This was my decision, my life, and I wasn't going to let guilt or family expectations dictate how I handled it. A few days later, Jessica texted again, but this time, it wasn't about my dad. It was about the wedding. "We need to talk about the wedding," she wrote. And that's when I realized that despite everything that had happened, the drama wasn't over yet. Jessica's text about the wedding sent a chill down my spine. I knew it was coming, the inevitable attempt to smooth things over, to pretend like nothing had happened, and to get me to agree to some half-hearted compromise for the sake of family harmony. But I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my sister, manipulate me into letting my dad back into my life on his terms. When I finally called her back, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Sarah, we can't let this wedding be overshadowed by all this drama. It's supposed to be a happy day. I sighed. Jess, I'm not the one making it about the drama. Dad did that the moment he tried to act like he's been this great, involved father. But don't you think we should at least invite him to the wedding? He is your dad after all. And there it was, the classic guilt trip, the one everyone had been using on me since that dinner. But I wasn't going to budge. Jess, he can come to the wedding if he wants, but I'm not giving him any special role. He's not walking me down the aisle, and he's not getting some father-daughter dance. I won't pretend everything's okay just to keep everyone else happy. There was a long pause before she finally replied, okay, I get it. For the first time in my life, it felt like I was standing up for myself, not just to my dad but to my whole family. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate how I lived my life anymore. And that, more than anything, was my victory.